Billionaire suffers a cyberattack and loses $9 billion, bankrupting his company, until the 7-year-old janitor's daughter reveals something that breaks his heart and changes him forever. Whether it's morning coffee or bedtime, you're exactly where you need to be. If this resonates, like and subscribe for more. Richard Coleman slammed his fist against the mahogany desk, causing his collection of awards to tremble. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he stared at the screen, numbers plummeting in real time. $2.9 billion, evaporating before his eyes. "Sir," his security chief Marcus said, voice tight with panic, "they've breached every firewall. Our entire system is compromised." Richard's empire, Titan Technologies, built over 30 years of relentless work, was collapsing in minutes. The cyber attack had bypassed security protocols that were supposedly impenetrable. His phone buzzed incessantly, board members, investors, the press. "Shut it down," Richard ordered, his voice hollow. "Shut everything down. If we do that, we might lose." "We've already lost everything," Richard roared, veins bulging in his neck. At 62, Richard Coleman had believed himself untouchable. Forbes had listed him among America's 50 wealthiest individuals. His downtown Chicago office occupied the top 3 floors of a building bearing his name. Now, as screens throughout the office flashed warning messages, that empire teetered on the edge of oblivion. In the hallway outside, Margaret Mitchell pushed her cleaning cart quietly, trying to remain invisible as executives rushed past in panic. At 42, Margaret had worked as Titan's night janitor for 3 years. Tonight, her 7-year-old daughter Emma sat quietly on the cart, small legs dangling, watching the chaos with solemn brown eyes. "Mommy, why is everyone scared?" Emma whispered. "Shh, honey," Margaret murmured, tucking a loose strand of hair behind Emma's ear. "Remember, you need to be quiet when you come to work with me." Margaret hadn't wanted to bring Emma, but her sister, who usually watched her, had an emergency. With her meager salary and mounting medical bills, childcare wasn't an option. The cancer treatments had drained what little savings she had, and the expensive medication her doctor recommended remained far beyond her reach. Inside his office, Richard stared at the falling numbers, decades of work unraveling. He thought of his late wife, Catherine, who'd always warned him about prioritizing business over humanity. "One day, Rick," she'd said before cancer took her 5 years ago, "you'll realize what truly matters." As alarms blared and the future of Titan Technologies hung in the balance, no one noticed little Emma watching the screens through the glass walls, her extraordinary mind processing information at a level no one could have imagined. And in that moment, as 2 very different worlds collided, the countdown to an unlikely salvation began. Dawn broke over Chicago, painting the Coleman Tower in hues of orange and gold. Richard hadn't left his office, his haggard reflection staring back from the windows. Titan stock had plummeted 78% overnight. Emergency board meetings had devolved into shouting matches. His phone contained 142 unanswered messages. The latest estimate is $9 billion, said Diane Foster, his CFO of 15 years. Her voice trembled slightly as she placed the report on his desk. "The malware encrypted everything. Customer data, proprietary technology, financial records. They're demanding a ransom, but even if we pay..." "We're finished," Richard completed, his voice distant. Outside, in the employee break room, Margaret Mitchell swallowed another pain pill dry. The medication barely touched the constant ache in her breast, where the cancer had spread aggressively. She'd hidden the diagnosis from everyone at work, fearing she'd lose the job she desperately needed for the health insurance, inadequate as it was. "Mommy, you forgot your breakfast," Emma said, offering a slightly squashed banana from her backpack. Margaret smiled weakly. "You eat it, sweetheart. I'm not hungry." Emma's eyes, wise beyond their 7 years, saw through the lie. "You need to eat to take your medicine. The doctor said so." The doctor had said many things about experimental treatments, survival rates, and options Margaret couldn't afford. What he hadn't said was how she would explain to her brilliant daughter that Mommy might not see her 8th birthday. "Ms. Mitchell," a stern voice interrupted. Stanley Weaver, head of building services, stood in the doorway. "You know company policy about bringing children to work." "I'm sorry, Mr. Weaver. My sister had an emergency and—" "One more incident and I'll have to let you go," he said, though his expression softened when Emma looked up at him. "The executives are in crisis mode. Keep her quiet and out of sight today." And back in his office, Richard stared at the family photo on his desk, Catherine, smiling from their yacht in happier times. "What would you do, Kathy?" he whispered. Titan's security team had worked through the night, bringing in external experts at exorbitant rates. The verdict remained unchanged. The attack was unlike anything they'd seen, with encryption protocols that would take years to break. "Sir," his assistant Jennifer interrupted, "the FBI Cyber Division is here." As federal agents filled his office, Richard felt the control slipping further away. Reporters had gathered outside the building, and rumors of Titan's impending bankruptcy spread across financial networks. In a quiet corner of the building, Emma sat cross-legged beside her mother's cleaning cart, a borrowed tablet in her lap. While Margaret disinfected executive bathrooms, Emma's fingers moved across the screen with purpose, her eyes narrowing as patterns emerged in the chaotic streams of code she'd glimpsed on the company screens. "That's not right," she whispered to herself, recognizing something in the digital chaos that the adults had missed. A signature, a pattern, a possibility. As night fell again, two worlds continued on separate trajectories. The millionaire drowning in the wreckage of his ambitions, and the little girl whose extraordinary mind had already begun to map a path through the darkness. Neither realized how soon those trajectories would collide. 3 days after the attack, Titan Technologies resembled a sinking ship. Employees huddled in groups, whispering about job prospects. The board had given Richard 48 hours to present a recovery plan before forcing a liquidation vote. "The government investigators say it's the most sophisticated attack they've ever seen," Diane reported, sliding a document across Richard's desk. "They've traced it to a group operating out of Eastern Europe, but recovery." She hesitated. Recovery isn't looking promising. Richard had aged years in days. His normally immaculate appearance had deteriorated. Silver hair disheveled, expensive suit wrinkled from sleeping on his office couch. The same determination that had built his empire now kept him from accepting defeat, though options dwindled by the hour. "What about our backup systems?" he demanded. "Compromised." "They were thorough, Richard." This wasn't random. Someone wanted to destroy us specifically. The thought had haunted him. Who hated him enough to orchestrate such complete destruction? Meanwhile, in the lower levels of the building, Margaret Mitchell leaned against her cleaning cart, overcome by a wave of dizziness. The cancer was progressing faster than her doctors had predicted. The experimental treatment that offered her best hope cost $475,000, money she'd never see in her lifetime. "Mommy?" Emma's voice seemed distant through the fog of pain. "Mommy, sit down." Margaret allowed herself to be guided to a chair, alarmed by her daughter's worried expression. "I'm okay, baby. Just tired." "You're not okay," Emma insisted, her small hand surprisingly cool against Margaret's feverish forehead. "You need the special medicine." Margaret pulled her daughter close, inhaling the scent of her shampoo. "Let's not worry about that now." Emma pulled away, her expression suddenly serious. "I know how to fix the company's computers." Margaret blinked, momentarily forgetting her pain. "What, honey?" "The numbers that disappeared. I know how to bring them back." Margaret smiled sadly, attributing the comment to childish imagination. "That's nice, sweetie." "I'm serious, Mommy," Emma insisted. "It's like a puzzle, and I can see how the pieces fit." Before Margaret could respond, Stanley Weaver appeared. "Mitchell, we need you on the executive floor. Someone got sick in the conference room." As Margaret gathered her cleaning supplies, Emma tugged at her sleeve. "I need to tell Mr. Coleman about the computers." "Emma, please," Margaret whispered. "Mr. Coleman is a very important, very busy man. He doesn't have time for—" "But I can help him." Emma's voice rose, drawing Stanley's attention. "Everything okay, Mitchell?" Margaret nodded quickly. "Fine, sir. My daughter just has an active imagination." In his office, Richard reviewed liquidation scenarios with his legal team. 30 years of building gone in an instant. He'd have to sell the house in Aspen, the apartment in Manhattan, the collection of classic cars. The thought didn't bother him as much as expected. Since Catherine's death, those possessions had provided little comfort. His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Coleman," Jennifer said, "there's a situation in the hallway. A child is insisting on speaking with you. Security is handling it, but I thought you should know." Richard sighed. "A child?" "The janitor's daughter, sir. She's quite persistent." Richard was about to dismiss the interruption when something stopped him. Catherine had always believed in signs and moments of fate. "Send them in," he said suddenly. His legal team exchanged glances as the door opened, revealing a small girl with determined eyes, her embarrassed mother hovering behind her. "Mr. Coleman," Emma said without preamble, "I know how to fix your computers. I'm so sorry, Mr. Coleman," Margaret said, mortified as she tried to pull Emma back. "She doesn't understand." Richard raised a hand, silencing her. Something in the child's confident gaze made him pause. "It's all right. Everyone give us the room." His team filed out, exchanging concerned glances. Richard's mental state had become a whispered concern throughout the company. Was this a sign he'd finally cracked under pressure? "What's your name?" Richard asked once they were alone. "Emma Mitchell. I'm 7.5. My mom cleans your building." Richard nodded to Margaret, who stood nervously by the door. "And you think you can fix our computer problem?" Emma nodded solemnly. "It's not random. The attack has a pattern, like a signature. I saw it on the screens." Richard leaned forward. "And how would you know about such things?" "I just see how things connect," Emma replied simply. "Numbers and codes make pictures in my head." Margaret stepped forward. "Mr. Coleman, Emma has always been different. Her teachers wanted to skip her ahead several grades, but we couldn't afford the special programs they recommended." Richard studied the child thoughtfully. Throughout his career, he'd developed an instinct for exceptional talent. Something about Emma's unwavering confidence reminded him of himself at a young age, before money and power had complicated everything. "Show me," he said finally, turning his laptop toward her. Emma's small fingers moved across the keyboard with surprising dexterity. Margaret watched in astonishment as her daughter navigated complex systems with the ease of a seasoned professional. "See this?" Emma pointed to a section of code. "It's hiding something. The bad code has a back door." Richard squinted at the screen, understanding enough to know he was witnessing something extraordinary. "How did you learn this?" Emma shrugged. "I just see it, like how some kids can play piano without lessons." For the first time in days, a flicker of hope stirred in Richard's chest. He'd built his fortune by recognizing opportunities others missed. Was it possible his salvation would come from this unlikely source? "If what you're saying is true," Richard said carefully, "it would be worth a great deal to the company." Emma's expression remained serious. "I want one thing in exchange." "Emma," Margaret interjected, horrified at her daughter's boldness. "What's that?" Richard asked, curious despite himself. "My mum needs special medicine for her cancer." "The doctors say it costs too much for regular people, but you're rich. Even if your company is broken, you can help her." The room fell silent. Margaret closed her eyes, humiliation washing over her. She'd kept her condition private, maintaining her dignity through grueling treatments and financial hardship. Richard looked at Margaret with new awareness, noticing the pallor beneath her complexion, the careful way she held herself against pain. "Is this true?" he asked quietly. Margaret nodded reluctantly. "Stage 3 breast cancer. The standard treatments haven't been effective, and the experimental options," she trailed off, "aren't covered by our company insurance," Richard finished, a strange hollowness opening inside him. Catherine had died of the same disease, despite access to the world's best treatments. "I don't want charity," Margaret said firmly, "and I certainly didn't put Emma up to this." Richard turned back to the child, whose determined expression hadn't wavered. "You understand what's happened to my company?" Emma nodded. "Someone locked all your important information and threw away the key, but they left fingerprints. I can follow them back." Richard made a decision. "Jennifer," he called, pressing the intercom. "Get Dr. Harrison from cybersecurity up here immediately, and call my private physician. I want him to meet with Ms. Mitchell today." As his assistant acknowledged the instructions, Richard looked between mother and daughter, one facing death with quiet dignity, the other facing the world with extraordinary gifts and fierce love. "Let's make a deal, Emma Mitchell," he said. By midnight, Titan's Crisis Command Center had been transformed. Whiteboards covered with Emma's surprisingly articulate diagrams lined the walls. Senior engineers watched in disbelief as the 7-year-old directed their efforts with unmistakable authority. "It's like watching Mozart conduct an orchestra," whispered Dr. Harrison, Titan's head of cybersecurity. "I've been in this field for 20 years, and I've never seen anything like her." Richard observed from the corner, equal parts hopeful and skeptical. He'd arranged for Margaret to see the top oncologist in Chicago that afternoon, secretly paying for comprehensive testing. The doctor's preliminary report confirmed what Margaret had told him. Without the experimental immunotherapy treatment, her prognosis was grim. "Mr. Coleman," Emma called, interrupting his thoughts. "I need to show you something." She led him to a monitor displaying what appeared to be encrypted data. "I found this hidden in the attack code. It's a message." Richard squinted at the screen. "What does it say?" "It says, 'Payback from an old friend.'" Emma looked up at him. "Do you have enemies, Mr. Coleman?" The question, coming from a child, struck Richard with unexpected force. Of course he had enemies. No one accumulated his level of wealth without making them. His mind raced through possibilities, competitors he'd crushed, partners he'd outmaneuvered, employees he'd dismissed. "It's someone who knows your systems," Emma continued, unaware of his internal turmoil. "Someone who's been inside before." Across town, in a modest hotel room, Margaret Mitchell stared at the ceiling, processing the oncologist's words. The experimental treatment offered a 68% chance of remission, miraculous odds, compared to her current path. And somehow, her brilliant, impossible daughter had secured her this chance. "Ms. Mitchell?" A nurse entered, carrying medication. "Dr. Whitman ordered these to help with the pain until we begin the treatment protocol." Margaret accepted the pills, still stunned by the rapid transformation of her circumstances. "As Mr. Coleman, is he really covering everything?" The nurse nodded. "The financial authorization is complete. Dr. Whitman has already ordered the custom medications from Switzerland." Back at Titan headquarters, Richard received a call that pulled him from the crisis room. It was Adrian Wells, his former chief technology officer, whom he'd fired 18 months earlier after catching him stealing proprietary algorithms. "Enjoying my handiwork, Richard?" Adrian's voice was smooth with satisfaction. "You," Richard breathed, pieces falling into place. "You did this." "Consider it my severance package," Adrian replied. "You took everything from me, my reputation, my career, my future. Now I've returned the favor." "You won't get away with this," Richard said, struggling to control his rage. Adrian laughed. "I already have. Even if you somehow recover the data, which is impossible, Titan's reputation is destroyed. Your stock is worthless. You're finished, Richard, just like you finished me." The call ended. Richard stood motionless, Adrian's words echoing in his mind. He'd considered himself justified in destroying Adrian's career. The man had stolen from him. That Adrian would retaliate with such devastating precision had never occurred to him. He returned to the crisis room, watching Emma work with the team of experts 3 and 4 times her age. Her small face was set in concentration, innocent, yet somehow ancient in its understanding. "We found something," called one of the engineers. "Emma's approach is working. We've decrypted a small portion of the financial database." For the first time in days, excitement rippled through the room. Richard felt something shift inside him. Not just hope for his company, but something more profound. This child, whose mother cleaned his building for minimum wage while battling cancer, had shown more loyalty to Titan than people he'd rewarded with millions. As dawn approached, Emma finally succumbed to exhaustion, curling up on a couch in the corner. Richard draped his suit jacket over her small form, a gesture that surprised even himself. "We'll continue after she rests," he told the team. "In the meantime, I want everything we can find on Adrian Wells." As the engineers dispersed, Richard sat beside the sleeping child, watching her peaceful expression. For the first time since Catherine's death, he felt the stirrings of something he'd thought permanently lost. His humanity. The next morning, Margaret arrived at Coleman Tower to find the lobby transformed. Security guards, who had previously ignored her, now escorted her directly to Richard's private elevator. "Mr. Coleman has requested you join the recovery team," explained Jennifer, who waited on the executive floor. "Emma is already working with the engineers." Margaret followed in bewilderment. Just days ago, she'd been invisible, cleaning bathrooms after hours. Now she walked through Titan's most restricted areas, watched with new respect by the same executives who'd previously looked through her. In the command center, she found Emma sitting beside Richard, explaining something about encryption patterns. The billionaire was listening with the focused attention he typically reserved for world leaders and major investors. "Mom!" Emma ran to embrace her. "We're winning! The bad code is breaking!" Richard approached, looking more human than Margaret had ever seen him. The imperious titan of industry had been replaced by a tired, humbled man. "Your daughter is extraordinary," he said quietly. "We've recovered approximately 20% of our encrypted data. The FBI is calling it unprecedented." Margaret felt pride mingled with uncertainty. "And her request about my treatment." "Already in progress," Richard assured her. "Dr. Whitman called this morning. They're synthesizing the medication now." Across the room, screens displayed progress bars as recovery programs ran. Engineers who had initially humored Emma now deferred to her insights with genuine respect. The atmosphere had shifted from desperation to cautious optimism. "There's something else you should know," Richard said, guiding Margaret to a private corner. "We've identified the person behind the attack. Adrian Wells, my former CTO." "Is that significant?" Richard nodded grimly. "Adrian doesn't just want money. He wants revenge. He's already attempting to counter our recovery efforts." Margaret glanced at Emma, suddenly fearful. "Is this dangerous? Should I take her home?" "We've implemented every security measure available," Richard assured her, "but there's another concern." He hesitated. "The board is meeting today. Despite our progress, they're voting on whether to liquidate the company." Margaret absorbed this, understanding the implications. "So even if Emma helps you recover everything—" "It might be too late," Richard finished. "Unless we can show substantial recovery by 3 o'clock, Titan Technologies will cease to exist by sundown, Emma approached, seemingly oblivious to the weight of their conversation. "Mr. Coleman, I found something weird in the code. It looks like a countdown." Richard's expression tightened. "What kind of countdown?" "It's set to trigger something in." Emma checked her watch. A child's plastic timepiece with cartoon characters. 5 hours and 12 minutes. A dead man's switch, Richard realized aloud. If Adrian can't have Titan's data, he'll make sure no one can. The stakes had suddenly escalated beyond financial ruin. If they couldn't stop the countdown, even their current recovery progress would be erased, permanently. As the team mobilized with renewed urgency, Richard found himself facing a truth he'd long avoided. Throughout his career, he'd valued things, money, power, assets, above people. He'd discarded employees like Adrian without considering the human cost, creating enemies through his indifference. Now his salvation rested in the hands of a child whose mother he'd never noticed, despite her years of service. The irony wasn't lost on him. "We need to accelerate our efforts," he announced to the team. "Whatever resources you need, they're yours. Nothing is off limits." As engineers dispersed with new determination, Richard turned to find Emma watching him with those unsettlingly perceptive eyes. "You're scared," she said simply. Richard considered denying it, then nodded. "Yes." "That's okay," Emma replied, slipping her small hand into his. "Mum says being brave isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what's right, even when you are scared." Richard looked down at their joined hands, his weathered by time and privilege, hers small, yet somehow stronger. In that moment, something fundamental shifted in Richard Coleman's understanding of wealth. True fortunes, he was beginning to realize, couldn't be measured in billions. The command center transformed into a battlefield of algorithms and code. Engineers worked frantically as 3 countdown clocks dominated the main screen. Adrian's dead man's switch, 4 hours, 47 minutes. The board meeting, 2 hours, 12 minutes. And a third showing recovered data, currently 27%. Richard paced behind Emma, who directed the recovery effort with uncanny precision. Her small fingers flew across the keyboard, while specialists twice her height and 4 times her age implemented her instructions. "It's like she's speaking their native language, but with an accent they've never heard," Dr. Harrison whispered to Richard. "She approaches problems from angles that never occur to trained professionals." Richard nodded, watching the percentage of recovered data tick upward, 28%. 29%. The progress was remarkable but still too slow. At this rate, they wouldn't reach 50% by the board meeting, the minimum threshold he believed might sway the vote. "Mr. Coleman," Jennifer interrupted, "Adrian Wells is calling again." Richard stepped away, accepting the call on speaker so the FBI agents present could record it. "Your little recovery effort is cute," Adrian said without preamble. "Especially using a child. That's low, even for you, Richard." "How did you—" Richard began, then realized the implication. "You're still in our systems." Adrian's laugh echoed through the room. "Did you think I wouldn't build in contingencies? I see everything, including your pathetic attempt to counter my dead man's switch." Across the room, Emma looked up sharply, her expression focused as she listened to Adrian's voice. "What do you want, Adrian?" Richard demanded. "Name your price." "I had a price 18 months ago," Adrian replied coldly. "Before you destroyed my reputation, blacklisted me from the industry, and made sure no venture capital firm would touch my startups. Now, I just want to watch you fall." The call ended abruptly. Richard turned to find Emma standing beside him, her expression thoughtful. "His voice has a pattern too," she said quietly. "What do you mean?" "He's not at home. There's an echo and background noise. He's somewhere big with lots of computers." One of the FBI agents approached. "Can you elaborate, Emma?" Emma closed her eyes, recalling the audio. Typing sounds from multiple keyboards. A hum, like the server rooms downstairs, and she concentrated harder. A voice on an intercom saying something about Sector 7 needing access. The agent's eyebrows shot up. That's impressive observation. Sector 7, Richard repeated, a suspicion forming. That's what we call our R&D department at our secondary data center in Evanston. He's inside your other facility, the agent asked, already alerting his team. It would explain how he's monitoring our recovery efforts, Richard confirmed. We've been focusing our security on external threats, not considering he might physically infiltrate our backup site. As the FBI mobilized to raid the Evanston facility, Emma returned to her workstation. Margaret had arrived with food, watching her daughter with a mixture of pride and concern. "How are you feeling?" Richard asked, noticing Margaret's pallor despite the medication. "Better, thank you," she replied, though the effort of standing seemed taxing. "The new treatment begins tomorrow." Richard nodded, suddenly uncomfortable with her gratitude. For 30 years, people like Margaret had cleaned his offices, maintained his buildings, served his meals, invisible cogs in his empire. How many had suffered while he remained oblivious in his penthouse office? "Emma says you lost your wife to cancer," Margaret said softly. Richard stiffened. "5 years ago, the same type you're fighting." "I'm sorry," Margaret said simply. "Emma told me you tried everything to save her." "Money couldn't save Catherine," Richard admitted, the truth he rarely voiced. "The best doctors, experimental treatments flown in from around the world. None of it mattered in the end." A commotion interrupted them as Jennifer rushed into the room. "Richard, the board members are arriving early. Howard Phillips is leading them up now." Richard checked the countdown. Still 90 minutes before the scheduled vote. "They're trying to catch us unprepared." "The recovery is at 34%, Dr. Harrison reported, nowhere near enough to sway them." Richard straightened his tie, preparing for battle. "Keep working. I'll stall them as long as possible." As he strode toward the conference room, Emma's voice stopped him. "Mr. Coleman, wait. I have an idea." She whispered something that made Richard's eyes widen. For the first time in days, he smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his haggard face. "That," he said, "is exactly what Catherine would have suggested." As board members filed into the executive conference room, Richard Coleman prepared to fight for his company with an unexpected strategy from the most unlikely strategist. Howard Phillips, Titan's board chairman for 15 years, surveyed the crisis room with thinly veiled disdain. At 71, with investments diversified across multiple industries, he viewed Titan's collapse as an unfortunate but manageable loss. "Richard," he said, nodding curtly, "we've moved the meeting forward. Market volatility waits for no one." Behind him stood 11 other board members, their expressions ranging from sympathetic to predatory. Richard had always maintained controlling interest in Titan, but the corporate bylaws granted the board authority in cases of catastrophic financial failure, a provision he'd never imagined would be invoked. "Before we begin," Richard said smoothly, "I'd like to introduce someone instrumental to our recovery efforts." He gestured to Emma, who stepped forward in her simple jeans and t-shirt, a stark contrast to the bespoke suits surrounding her. "A child?" Phillips scoffed. "Is this a joke, Richard?" "This is Emma Mitchell," Richard continued, unfazed. "Thanks to her unique abilities, we've already recovered 34% of our encrypted data, with more being restored every minute." The board members exchanged skeptical glances. Diane Foster, ever loyal as CFO, displayed the recovery statistics on the conference room screen. "Impressive," acknowledged Victoria Reeves, one of the younger board members. "But even at 100% recovery, the damage to investor confidence is severe. Our stock has fallen 82% in 3 days. Moreover," Phillips added, "the fact that a child penetrated the attack while our multi-million-dollar security team failed raises serious questions about management." Emma stepped forward. "May I say something?" Phillips blinked, caught off guard. This is highly irregular. So is losing $3 billion to a cyber-attack, Emma countered, drawing surprised chuckles from several board members. I understand you're afraid. The room fell silent. Afraid? Phillips repeated, indignant. Yes, Emma continued calmly. You're afraid that if you support Mr. Coleman and the recovery fails, you'll lose money and look foolish. It's safer to give up now. Richard watched in astonishment as his board, titans of industry who controlled billions, were rendered speechless by a 7-year-old's simple truth. But giving up is never the answer, Emma continued. When my mom got sick, the doctors wanted her to try easy treatments that wouldn't help much. The hard treatment, the one that might actually save her, was too expensive and difficult. But that's the one worth fighting for. Margaret watched from the doorway, tears streaming silently down her face. Young lady, Phillips began, his tone softening despite himself, business decisions can't be based on emotional appeals. Why not? Emma challenged. Isn't business about people? If you close this company, what happens to the 5,327 people who work here? The precise number, which Richard himself hadn't known, hung in the air. How did you? Phillips began. I looked at the employee database while fixing the payroll system, Emma explained. That's 5,327 families who need their jobs. Before Phillips could respond, alarms blared throughout the building. Dr. Harrison burst into the conference room. The dead man's switch has accelerated, he reported urgently. We have less than 40 minutes before all data is permanently erased. Richard turned to the board. Vote if you must, but give us these 40 minutes to fight. Phillips hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Proceed with your recovery efforts. We'll reconvene after the deadline. As the team rushed back to work, Richard received a call from the FBI team at the Evanston facility. We've secured the building, Mr. Coleman, but Wells isn't here. However, we found evidence he was accessing your systems through a backdoor connection. Can you trace it? Working on it. He's bouncing his signal through multiple servers. Richard relayed this information to the team. Emma, already back at her workstation, looked up thoughtfully. If he's watching us, she reasoned, maybe we can trick him. What do you mean? We create a fake recovery screen showing we're failing while actually working on a different system he can't see. Dr. Harrison snapped his fingers. Network segmentation. We could isolate a subnet and make it invisible to his monitoring tools. Within minutes, they had implemented Emma's strategy. The main screens showed decreasing recovery percentages, a deliberate deception, while the actual work continued on quarantined systems. Recovery at 42% and climbing, reported an engineer from the secure terminal. Richard watched the countdown clock with growing tension. 28 minutes remaining. Even with their accelerated progress, complete recovery seemed impossible. Mr. Coleman, Emma called, I need to try something different. She explained her idea, a radical approach that even Dr. Harrison admitted he wouldn't have considered. It's risky, the security chief warned. If it fails, we could lose everything we've recovered so far. And if we do nothing, Adrian's switch will erase it anyway, Richard countered. Do it, Emma. As Emma implemented her solution, Margaret approached Richard. Whatever happens, she said quietly, thank you for believing in her. No one ever has before. Richard nodded, watching the little girl who had shown more courage and innovation than executives paid millions. I believe in her, he said simply, and I believe we've both been given a second chance. 20 minutes to complete data loss, announced the automated system as tension in the command center reached fever pitch. Emma's strategy, using fragments of Adrian's own code against him, had accelerated their recovery efforts dramatically. The percentage counter now showed 57%, but the approaching deadline loomed like a guillotine blade. We've found something, called one of the FBI technicians. Wells is operating from a mobile command center, a modified RV parked near Navy Pier. How close are you to apprehending him? Richard demanded. Teams are converging, but traffic is heavy. ETA 12 minutes. Too late, Richard realized. The dead man's switch would trigger before they reached Adrian. On the main screen, recovery progress continued. 58%, 59%. Their deception appeared to be working. Adrian hadn't countered their new approach, suggesting he remained unaware of their true strategy. Suddenly, Emma gasped. He knows. He's changing something in the code. The screens flickered as Adrian's countermeasures engaged. The countdown accelerated dramatically. 19 minutes instantly became 8 minutes. He's triggered the switch early, Dr. Harrison reported, fingers flying across his keyboard. We're losing ground. Recovery percentage began to drop. 59%, 58%, 57%. Adrian had discovered their deception and was retaliating with devastating efficiency. Mom, Emma called urgently, I need your help. Margaret hurried to her daughter's side, confused. Honey, I don't know anything about computers. It's not about computers, Emma explained, pulling her mother closer to whisper something. Margaret's eyes widened, then she nodded and hurried from the room. What are you planning? Richard asked, as alarms blared around them. A distraction, Emma replied, her small face set with determination. And I need to talk to Adrian. Richard hesitated, then nodded to Jennifer. Set up a direct connection. As engineers fought desperately against the accelerating data loss, Jennifer established communication with Adrian's location. His face appeared on screen, triumphant despite the FBI closing in on his position. Calling to beg, Richard, he sneered, then faltered at the sight of Emma. What is this? Hello, Mr. Wells, Emma said calmly. I'm the one who's been undoing your attack. Adrian's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. That's impossible. You're what? 8? 7.5, Emma corrected. And it's not impossible. Your code is really good, but it has patterns, like fingerprints. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Adrian's face. You expect me to believe a child broke encryption that would challenge government agencies. Why did you attack Mr. Coleman's company? Emma asked, ignoring his skepticism. Adrian's jaw tightened. He destroyed everything I built. 18 months ago, I developed an algorithm that would have revolutionized predictive analytics. Richard claimed I stole it from Titan, but the truth is, he stole it from me. Richard stepped forward, anger flashing in his eyes. That's a lie! The evidence was conclusive. The evidence was fabricated, Adrian cut in. By the time I realized what had happened, you'd already turned the industry against me. My reputation was ruined. Emma looked between them thoughtfully. So both of you think the other one stole something? It's not what I think, Adrian insisted. It's what happened. Then why erase the evidence? Emma challenged. If Mr. Coleman really stole your work, wouldn't the proof be in Titan's systems? The same systems you're trying to destroy? Adrian hesitated, visibly processing her logic. 7 minutes to complete data loss, announced the automated system. What if you're both telling the truth? Emma continued. What if neither of you stole anything? That's impossible, both men said simultaneously. Unless someone else wanted you to fight, Emma suggested. Someone who benefits if you destroy each other. On a secondary screen, Margaret reappeared in the command center, nodding to Emma. Their mysterious plan was in motion. Recovery holding at 54%, reported Dr. Harrison. But we're running out of time. Emma turned back to Adrian. Stop the attack, Mr. Wells. If you're right about Mr. Coleman stealing your work, let's find the proof together instead of destroying it. Adrian's expression hardened. Why should I trust either of you? Because I'm 7.5, Emma replied simply, and grown-ups are supposed to listen when kids make sense. A surprised laugh escaped Adrian despite himself. For a moment, the bitterness in his expression softened. The command center door burst open as Margaret returned with Stanley Weaver, the building services manager. "Tell them," Margaret urged. Stanley stepped forward nervously. 18 months ago, I was approached by someone claiming to be from corporate security. They paid me to install monitoring software on both Mr. Coleman's and Mr. Wells' computers. Richard and Adrian stared in shock. "Who?" Richard demanded. "Who paid you?" "Victor Zhang," Stanley replied. "From Quantum Dynamics." Richard's face drained of color. "Our chief competitor. 5 minutes to complete data loss," announced the system. On screen, Adrian's expression transformed as the pieces fell into place. "Son of a bitch, we've been played against each other." "Stop the attack," Emma pleaded. "Then we can prove what really happened." Adrian hesitated, conflicted after 18 months of focused vengeance. 4 minutes, 30 seconds to complete data loss. "I can't stop it," Adrian admitted, his voice tight with frustration. "The dead man's switch is autonomous now. It's designed to complete its sequence even if I try to abort." Richard turned to Emma. "Any ideas?" Emma was already moving, fingers flying across the keyboard. "If we can't stop it, maybe we can redirect it." "What does that mean?" Richard asked. "Like a river," Emma explained, not looking up. "If you can't stop the water, you change where it flows." Dr. Harrison leaned over her shoulder, eyes widening as he understood her strategy. "She's creating a virtual environment, a sandbox. If it works, the switch will trigger inside the containment area instead of across our actual systems." 3 minutes to complete data loss, the automated voice announced. On screen, Adrian watched Emma's work with visible amazement. "That approach shouldn't. How did you even think of that?" Emma didn't answer, her focus absolute as she constructed the digital equivalent of a bomb containment vessel. Sweat beaded on her forehead, her small shoulders rigid with concentration. "FBI teams have reached the RV," Jennifer reported. "They're moving in to apprehend Wells." Adrian glanced off camera, then back at the screen. "I'm not resisting, but you need my access credentials to help contain this." He began typing rapidly, sending authorization codes to Emma's terminal. "Recovery stable at 54%, reported an engineer. "If the containment works, we might save what we've already restored. 2 minutes to complete data loss." Richard paced behind Emma, helpless as the fate of his company rested on the small shoulders of a child he'd met just days ago. Around them, engineers worked feverishly, following Emma's lead in constructing the virtual environment. "It's too complex," Dr. Harrison warned. "We need more time to build proper containment." We don't have more time," Richard reminded him. "I have an idea," Adrian interjected from the screen, FBI agents now visible behind him. "Emma, if you modify the parameter sequence on line 427, you can exploit a recursion loop in my original code." Emma nodded, implementing his suggestion without hesitation. Richard watched in astonishment as victim and attacker collaborated, united against the autonomous destruction neither could control alone. 1 minute to complete data loss. "It's not going to hold," Dr. Harrison warned, analyzing the containment structure. "The encryption cascade is too powerful. We need to divide it," Emma said suddenly. "Like when Mom separates laundry into different machines." Understanding dawned on Adrian's face. Distributed containment across multiple virtual environments. Brilliant. With seconds ticking away, they split the containment strategy across separate systems. Emma coordinated the effort with preternatural calm, directing engineers with the authority of someone 4 times her age. 30 seconds to complete data loss. The board members had returned, watching in stunned silence from the doorway. Howard Phillips stood at the front, his earlier skepticism replaced by unconcealed amazement. 15 seconds to complete data loss. "Almost there," Emma murmured, making final adjustments. "Everyone, step back from your terminals. 10 seconds. 9, 8. The room fell silent, dozens of people holding their breath collectively. 3, 2, 1. A cascade of error messages flooded every screen simultaneously. Warnings flashed and systems rebooted automatically. For several agonizing seconds, chaos reigned in the digital infrastructure. Then, gradually, systems stabilized. Status indicators returned one by one. Containment holding at 87% efficiency, reported an engineer, voice thick with disbelief. Data integrity, maintaining. Recovery status? Richard demanded. Dr. Harrison checked the primary terminal. Recovery intact at 54%, and it's climbing again. 55%, 56%. A cheer erupted throughout the command center. Engineers embraced, some openly weeping with relief. On screen, Adrian slumped in his chair as FBI agents secured his equipment. "You did it," Richard said to Emma, who sat exhausted in her oversized chair. She shook her head. "We did it, all of us together." Margaret enveloped her daughter in a fierce hug, tears streaming down her face. "My brilliant, amazing girl." Howard Phillips approached, the other board members following behind him. The room quieted as he stood before Richard. "In 30 years on corporate boards," Phillips said solemnly, "I have never witnessed anything like what I've seen today." He extended his hand to Richard. "The vote is unnecessary. The board unanimously supports your continued leadership of Titan Technologies." Richard accepted the handshake, relief washing over him. But as he looked at Emma and Margaret, the janitor and her extraordinary daughter who had saved his empire, he realized his priorities had fundamentally shifted. "Thank you, Howard," he said, "but I have some significant changes to propose for Titan's future." 2 weeks later, Richard stood before a packed auditorium in Titan's headquarters. Employees filled every seat, media representatives lined the back wall, and financial analysts clustered near the exits, ready to race off with breaking news. "Titan has survived the most significant cyber attack in corporate history," Richard began, his voice carrying through the hushed space. "Our recovery stands at 97% completion, with remaining data expected to be restored by month's end." Applause erupted. Employees who had feared unemployment now celebrating their company's miraculous resurrection. This recovery would have been impossible without extraordinary effort from our security team, led by Dr. Harrison, Richard continued, nodding toward the cybersecurity chief. "But the true architect of our salvation was someone none of us expected." He gestured to the front row, where Emma sat between Margaret and Jennifer. The little girl wore a new dress for the occasion, her hair pulled back with a sparkly headband. Emma Mitchell, just 7 years old, demonstrated problem-solving abilities that humbled our most brilliant engineers. She didn't just save Titan, she revealed the truth behind the attack. On a large screen behind Richard, corporate photographs of Victor Zhang appeared. "We've provided federal authorities with conclusive evidence that our competitor, Quantum Dynamics, orchestrated industrial espionage against both Titan and Adrian Wells, deliberately turning us against each other." Murmurs rippled through the audience. The scandal had already dominated business news for days, with Quantum's stock plummeting amid multiple federal investigations. "Adrian Wells has withdrawn his guilty plea in exchange for cooperation with authorities," Richard continued. "The algorithms he developed, which I wrongly believed were stolen from Titan, will be properly credited to him with appropriate compensation." In the second row, Adrian sat with his attorney, his expression a complex mixture of vindication and lingering resentment. Their relationship would never be friendly, but the toxic hatred had been replaced by grudging mutual respect. "But today isn't about our past mistakes," Richard said. "It's about Titan's future, a future that will be built on fundamentally different values." He outlined the changes already approved by the board: significant raises for all employees below executive level, comprehensive healthcare coverage without exclusions for pre-existing conditions, educational scholarships for employees' children, and a new division focused on developing accessible technology for disadvantaged communities. Finally, Richard concluded, I'm announcing the establishment of the Catherine Coleman Foundation for Technological Innovation, with initial funding of $500 million. The foundation's first initiative will be the Emma Mitchell Scholarship Program, identifying extraordinary young minds from underprivileged backgrounds. Emma's eyes widened in surprise. Margaret squeezed her daughter's hand, tears threatening to spill over. As the announcements concluded and the auditorium emptied, Richard joined Emma and Margaret in a private conference room. "How are you feeling?" he asked Margaret, noting her improved color. "The treatment is working," she confirmed. "Doctor Whitman says the tumors have already reduced by 30%. Richard nodded, genuine relief washing over him. "I've had Jennifer prepare some documents for you both to review." He slid folders across the table, one thin, one considerably thicker. "What's this?" Margaret asked, opening the thinner folder. "A formal job offer," Richard explained. "Titan needs a director of community engagement, someone who understands the needs of working families and can help shape our new initiatives." Margaret stared at the employment contract, focusing on the salary figure, more than 10 times what she'd earned as a janitor. "Mr. Coleman, I appreciate the gesture, but I don't have qualifications for this position." "You raised Emma," Richard countered. "That suggests extraordinary judgment and insight to me." Emma had opened the thicker folder, her expression puzzled as she examined complex legal documents. "What are these?" "Patents," Richard explained. "For the containment system you developed during the crisis, our legal team has registered 17 distinct innovations in your name." "My name?" Emma repeated. Richard nodded. "They're yours, Emma. The projected licensing value exceeds $30 million over the next decade." Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. "That's impossible." "It's already done," Richard said simply. "Additionally, I've established a trust fund for Emma's education, any school, anywhere in the world, whenever she's ready." Emma studied Richard thoughtfully. "You're different now." Richard smiled faintly. "Am I?" She nodded. "Before, you were like a locked computer, all passwords and firewalls. Now you're open source." Richard laughed, a genuine laugh that erased years from his face. "My wife would have liked that description." Margaret shook her head, overwhelmed. "Why are you doing all this?" Richard considered the question carefully. "For most of my life, I measured success by numbers in bank accounts and stock valuations. I convinced myself that was what mattered." He looked at Emma. "Your daughter showed me what true value looks like." "By fixing your computers?" Margaret asked. "By demonstrating courage, brilliance, and compassion simultaneously," Richard corrected. "By reminding me that people matter more than profits." Emma, who had been examining her patent documents, looked up. "What happens to Adrian now?" "He's agreed to lead a new cybersecurity initiative for the government, identifying vulnerabilities in critical infrastructure. His legal troubles are mostly behind him." "Good," Emma said decisively. "He's really smart, just angry." "Like I was," Richard acknowledged. "Sometimes it takes losing everything to understand what truly matters." As they prepared to leave, Richard handed Margaret one final envelope. "Your new office is on the 22nd floor. Jennifer will help you get settled next week." Margaret accepted the envelope, still dazed by the transformation of her circumstances. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to," Richard replied. "Just promise me one thing. When Emma revolutionizes the tech industry, remember who spotted her talent first." Emma grinned, suddenly looking like the 7-year-old child she was, rather than the prodigy who had saved a billion-dollar company. I'm going to build computers that think like people instead of just doing math. I believe you will, Richard said, entirely serious, and I can't wait to see it. 1 year later, Richard sat in the front row of an elementary school auditorium, watching as Emma Mitchell accepted the Presidential Medal of Innovation, the youngest recipient in history. Beside him, Margaret, elegant in a designer suit that matched her new executive position, wiped away tears of pride. Emma had spent the past year dividing her time between advanced studies with private tutors and developing what she called empathetic algorithms, coding that could recognize and respond to human emotional states. Major technology companies had already entered bidding wars for licensing rights, with Emma insisting that healthcare applications receive priority. "She's still the same Emma," Margaret had told Richard that morning. "She still sleeps with her stuffed rabbit and forgets to tie her shoes. But then she'll say something about neural networks that leaves her MIT mentors speechless." The White House ceremony concluded with Emma shaking the president's hand, her medal gleaming against her blue dress. As cameras flashed, Richard reflected on the extraordinary changes of the past year. Titan Technologies had not only recovered, but thrived, with stock values exceeding pre-attack levels. More significantly, their corporate culture had transformed. The Katherine Coleman Foundation had already awarded scholarships to 27 gifted children from disadvantaged backgrounds, creating a pipeline of diverse talent for the technology sector. Margaret's cancer had responded remarkably well to treatment, with her oncologist using the term remission for the first time last month. Her leadership of Titan's community initiatives had earned national recognition, bringing technological education to underserved neighborhoods across Chicago. Even Adrian Wells had found redemption, his government cybersecurity work preventing 3 major attacks on infrastructure in recent months. While he and Richard maintained a professional distance, the toxic animosity had dissolved into something resembling mutual respect. After the ceremony, Emma bounded over to Richard, her medal swinging around her neck. "Did you see? The president asked me about quantum encryption." "I saw," Richard confirmed, smiling. "What did you tell him?" "That he should hire more 8-year-olds as advisors," Emma replied with a grin. Richard laughed, marveling at her combination of genius and childlike directness. As photographers approached for more pictures, he stepped back, watching Margaret embrace her daughter. His phone vibrated with a message from Jennifer. "Board meeting in 30 minutes. New acquisition proposal, ready for presentation." Richard sent a quick reply, "Delay until tomorrow, at White House with Emma." A year ago, nothing would have superseded a board meeting in Richard's priorities. Now, watching Emma explain complex algorithms to fascinated government officials, he couldn't imagine being anywhere else. "Mr. Coleman." A White House aide approached. "The president would like a word, if you have a moment." Richard nodded, following the aide to a small reception room where the president waited. "Extraordinary child," the president said, gesturing toward the main hall where Emma continued to charm everyone she met. Her algorithms could revolutionize everything from healthcare to defense. "She'll change the world," Richard agreed. "I'm just grateful to have a front-row seat." "I understand you've become something of a guardian to her," the president observed. Richard considered this. "I prefer mentor, or perhaps student. I've learned more from Emma than she has from me." As they discussed the Katherine Coleman Foundation's initiatives, Richard caught sight of Emma and Margaret through the doorway. They stood together near a window, sunlight illuminating them, as Emma excitedly explained something, her hands gesturing animatedly while Margaret listened with pride and love. The scene transported Richard back to that pivotal moment in his office a year ago, a desperate billionaire facing ruin, confronted by a determined child offering salvation in exchange for her mother's life. "Everything all right, Richard?" the president asked, noting his distraction. Yes, Richard replied, returning his attention to the conversation, just reflecting on how quickly life can change. Later, as they left the White House, Emma skipped ahead while Richard walked alongside Margaret. She insisted on donating half her patent licensing fees to pediatric cancer research, Margaret said quietly. When I asked why, she said, because some kids don't have moms who work for people like Mr. Coleman. Richard felt an unexpected tightness in his throat, wise beyond her years. She also said something else, Margaret continued, that when she helped save your company, she actually saved 3 things: Titan, my life, and your heart. Richard stopped walking, struck by the profound truth in the child's assessment. Out of the mouths of babes, he murmured. Ahead of them, Emma had discovered a squirrel on the White House lawn and was watching it with the same intense concentration she applied to complex code. In that moment, the dichotomy of her existence was perfectly captured. An extraordinary mind housed in a child who still found wonder in ordinary discoveries. What happens next? Margaret asked. With Emma's future, I mean. The opportunities coming her way are overwhelming. Richard watched as Emma abandoned the squirrel to examine the presidential medal more closely, turning it over in her small hands with evident delight. We protect her childhood, he said firmly. Her gifts will change the world, but not at the expense of who she is. Margaret nodded, relief evident in her expression. That's exactly what I needed to hear. As they approached the waiting car, Emma ran back to them, eyes bright with excitement. I just had the best idea for a new algorithm. It would help doctors predict cancer recurrence years before symptoms appear. Richard exchanged glances with Margaret, both recognizing the pattern. Emma's greatest inspirations often arrived seemingly from nowhere, quantum leaps of insight that experts would later struggle to reverse engineer. Tell me about it on the way to dinner, Richard suggested, opening the car door. As they drove away from the White House, Emma enthusiastically outlined her newest breakthrough, using napkins from the car's refreshment compartment to sketch complex formulas. Richard listened intently, occasionally asking questions that helped refine her thinking. The future stretched before them, brilliant with possibilities, rich with purpose, and fundamentally transformed by the unlikely collision of their lives. In the rearview mirror, the White House receded from view, a fitting metaphor for the journey they had taken. From the brink of disaster to the pinnacle of recognition, their path had been neither straight nor predictable. But as Richard watched Emma sketch another formula, her face alight with the pure joy of discovery, he knew with absolute certainty that true fortune had nothing to do with billions. The billion-dollar CEO stared in disbelief at the tiny figure in the waiting room, clutching a worn notebook and announcing she had the solution to his company's catastrophic software failure. 8-year-old Lily Madison had bypassed security, infiltrated his schedule, and was about to change his life forever. But nobody could have imagined what would happen next. James Parker slammed his fist against the sleek conference table, causing the senior executives surrounding him to flinch in unison. At 34, he was the youngest CEO of a Fortune 500 company, and right now that company was hemorrhaging money by the minute. $500 million, he repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. That's what this security vulnerability will cost us if we don't patch it within the week. Someone tell me how our supposedly unhackable platform just became a liability overnight. The room remained silent. Parker Technologies' revolutionary secure payment system, the one that handled transactions for nearly half of America's online retail, had mysteriously begun rejecting valid transactions while approving fraudulent ones. The stock was in freefall. Marcus Jefferson, his COO and oldest friend, cleared his throat. James, we've got every engineer working around the clock. The problem is, the vulnerability seems to adapt when we try to patch it. It's like nothing we've ever seen." James ran his hand through his dark hair, a habit from his coding days before he became the face of American tech innovation. The board was already questioning whether a 34-year-old was equipped to handle a crisis of this magnitude. 5 years building this company from nothing, and it could all vanish because of some vulnerability they'd overlooked. His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Parker, there's a little girl in reception insisting she has an appointment." James frowned. "Nancy, I don't have time for—" "Sir, she says she's here about your payment authentication vulnerability. She mentioned a recursive loop issue that matches what our security team just identified in their preliminary report." The executives exchanged glances. James felt his stomach drop. Their internal security assessment wasn't public information. "Tell security to escort her up immediately," he ordered, "and find out how she got this information." The door opened moments later, and for a moment James thought there had been a mistake. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old, small even for her age, with curly brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore jeans, beat-up sneakers, and a faded T-shirt with a cartoon robot. Under her arm was a worn spiral notebook covered in stickers. "Hello," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I'm Lily Madison. I'm here about your recursive authentication vulnerability." The executives stared in stunned silence. "How do you know about our system?" James finally asked, tension evident in his voice. Lily clutched her notebook tighter. "Children's Memorial Hospital uses Parker Pay for their billing system. I've been there a lot. They had a security incident last month when the system kept freezing during transaction processing. I noticed the pattern." "That doesn't explain how you'd have insight into our code," the security director interjected. "I didn't need to see your actual code," Lily explained. "The error produces specific symptoms when it fails. My dad was a cybersecurity specialist before he died. He taught me to recognize pattern behaviors in systems." She paused. "When I saw the news about Parker Technologies having transaction failures, I recognized the same symptoms." James studied the child skeptically. "Young lady, these are complex enterprise systems. You can't diagnose them from a hospital terminal." Lily's large brown eyes didn't waver. "When authentication protocols have recursive logic errors, they create specific failure patterns. Your public API documentation shows enough of your verification workflow that I could identify where the vulnerability must be." The technical director choked on his coffee. James stood slowly, studying the child. "Everyone out," he commanded. "Except you," he pointed at Marcus. When the room cleared, James gestured to a chair. "Sit down and explain exactly who you are and what you know." Lily climbed onto the chair, her feet dangling above the floor. "I already told you. I'm Lily Madison, I'm 8 years old, and I know how to fix your system." "This is ridiculous," James muttered, pacing in front of the windows overlooking downtown Chicago. "Marcus, call security. Your authentication handshake has a logical flaw in its verification sequence," Lily interrupted, opening her notebook. "When transaction amounts contain specific patterns that trigger your fraud detection algorithm, it creates an endless verification loop that overloads your memory allocation." Marcus leaned forward. "James, that actually matches what our team has been seeing." "She could have heard that anywhere," James dismissed, though doubt crept up his spine. "Your public developer documentation shows your authentication workflow," Lily continued, unperturbed. "But it doesn't show that you're using nested verification without proper exit conditions. That's where the vulnerability is." James froze. She was describing exactly what their internal team had just identified. "How did you learn about systems like this?" Marcus asked, while James processed her words. "My dad taught me programming when I was 4, Lily replied, a shadow crossing her face. "He specialized in finding security flaws in financial systems before the plane crash." James looked up sharply, the child's words striking something deep within him. Loss. He recognized it immediately in her eyes. "She's right about the recursive loop," he admitted reluctantly to Marcus, "but that doesn't explain how she diagnosed it with such specificity." Lily pulled a tablet from her backpack. "I built a simulation based on your public API documentation. See?" She opened a program showing a simplified version of their transaction flow. "When I input these transaction patterns, it creates the same failure signatures your system is showing in the news reports." James and Marcus exchanged looks of disbelief as she demonstrated her simulation. "Hold on," James held up his hand. "Let's back up. You're saying you figured this out from a hospital computer. Why were you there?" A flicker of vulnerability crossed Lily's face before she squared her small shoulders. "I live there, mostly. Foster care when I'm not having treatments?" Something about her matter-of-fact tone made James's chest tighten. He thought of the children's hospital, its cheerful murals attempting to mask the reality of young lives battling against time. "What's wrong with you?" he asked, then winced at his bluntness. "Heart defect. Complicated one." She pointed to a barely visible scar peeking from her collar. "Third surgery next week." Marcus gave James a look, the same one he'd given at Rebecca's funeral 5 years ago, when James had shut down completely, throwing himself into building Parker Technologies to avoid facing his grief. "Show me your solution," James said, diverting from emotions to the familiar territory of code. Lily opened her notebook, revealing pages of meticulous notes written in a child's careful handwriting. Diagrams, workflow charts, and logical decision trees filled the pages. James leaned closer, his eyes widening. "This is actually a viable approach," he admitted, scanning her proposed fix. "You've created a verification checkpoint that would prevent the recursive loop while maintaining security integrity. I call it a safety net," Lily said, a hint of pride in her voice. "Dad always said good code needs safety nets." As James reviewed her solution, memories surfaced of his own childhood, staying up late with a flashlight under covers, teaching himself programming on a second-hand laptop. The familiar refuge of logic and problem-solving when the real world became too painful. "If we implement this approach," Marcus said, studying the diagram, "we could have the system back online within hours instead of days." James nodded slowly, a growing realization that this child had potentially identified a solution his entire security team had missed. "Lily, if this works, you've just saved us from a catastrophic loss." He studied her, curiosity winning over suspicion. "Why did you do this? What do you want?" She met his gaze steadily. "I want you to be my dad for a day." The silence in the room was absolute. James stared at the little girl, certain he had misheard. "You want what?" he finally managed. "To be your daughter, for one day." Lily's voice remained matter-of-fact, but her fingers fidgeted with the edge of her notebook. "Before my surgery next week." Marcus made a strangled noise beside him. James shot him a warning glance before turning back to Lily. "Why me?" James asked carefully. "You don't even know me." Lily tilted her head. "I know Parker Technologies. I read about you. You built something amazing after your wife died. You're smart. You don't give up." She paused. "And you don't have any kids." The directness of her assessment felt like a physical blow. How did this child see through him so easily? "Look," James said, attempting to regain control of the situation. "If your solution helps, we can certainly arrange some kind of reward. A college scholarship fund, perhaps." "I don't need money," Lily interrupted. "The social worker says my chances of adoption decrease by 20% with each surgery. Statistically, I'm already unlikely." Her voice didn't waver, but her knuckles whitened around her notebook. "I just want to know what it feels like before my surgery one day." Marcus stepped forward. "James, can I speak with you privately?" In the corner of the office, Marcus kept his voice low. "This is insane. You can't just borrow a child for a day." I know that, James hissed, but if her solution works, then reward her appropriately. A donation to the hospital, a special tour of the company, whatever. But this father-daughter fantasy, you can't encourage it. James glanced back at Lily, who sat patiently, legs swinging beneath the chair. For a moment, he saw himself at that age, after his own father had abandoned the family, before his mother started working double shifts, when the loneliness had first become his constant companion. Let's test her approach first, James decided. If it works, we'll figure out something appropriate. They returned to Lily, who looked up expectantly. We're going to try your solution, James told her. If it helps, we'll discuss your request. A hint of a smile touched Lily's lips. It'll work. 4 hours later, after James had personally overseen the implementation of Lily's solution by his security team, the crisis monitoring screens began to show green. Transaction failures dropped to 0. Authentication processes stabilized. It's working, breathed the head engineer. The authentication checkpoint catches the recursion before it begins. James stared at the screens, then at the small figure sitting nearby, swinging her legs and drawing robots in her notebook. She hadn't suggested a complete rewrite of their code, just an elegant checkpoint that prevented the vulnerability from being exploited. Call Thomas Reed at Chicago Child Services, James instructed his assistant. Tell him I need to discuss Lily Madison's case immediately. Later that afternoon, in a conference room now emptied of executives and filled instead with a suspicious social worker, James found himself agreeing to the strangest arrangement of his life. Let me understand this, Thomas Reed said, adjusting his glasses. You want temporary guardianship of Lily for a 24-hour period as some sort of what, exactly? Field trip. More like an educational shadow experience, James improvised, uncomfortable under the social worker's scrutiny. Lily has shown exceptional aptitude for systems thinking. Parker Technologies would like to encourage this talent through a mentor shadow day. Reed's expression remained skeptical. And this has nothing to do with the system failure your company mysteriously recovered from today. James felt Lily's eyes on him. That's confidential company business, he replied carefully. Reed turned to Lily. Is this what you want? To spend a day with Mr. Parker? Lily nodded solemnly. Yes, very much. After Reed had gone through official documentation for temporary guardianship with strict parameters and a promise to return the following afternoon, James found himself alone with Lily in his office, wondering what exactly he had agreed to. So, he said awkwardly, one day starting tomorrow. Lily nodded, a cautious hope in her eyes. I made a list of father-daughter things. She carefully tore a page from her notebook and handed it to him. In neat, childish handwriting was a list that made his heart constrict. Breakfast together, go to the park. Teach me something new. Watch a movie with popcorn, tuck me in at night. Nothing fancy, she said quickly, misinterpreting his silence. I researched normal father activities. James stared at the list, then at this extraordinary child who had helped save his company and somehow engineered her way into his life for a day. Lily, he said softly, why is this so important to you? She looked down at her hands. When you're sick a lot, people only see that part of you. I just want to be somebody's daughter, just once. Even if it's pretend. James barely slept that night. His penthouse, usually a sanctuary of minimalist design and peaceful solitude, felt strangely empty as he paced the living room, Lily's list in hand. What did he know about being a father? His own had left when he was 10, leaving only bitter memories and a lifetime of abandonment issues. His marriage to Rebecca had been cut short before they could start the family she'd wanted. After her death, he'd poured everything into Parker Technologies, letting relationships and personal connections fall away. Now a child with a serious heart condition and an uncanny gift for systems thinking had maneuvered him into a role he'd deliberately avoided. At 7 a.m., His driver brought Lily from the children's hospital to his penthouse. She arrived carrying a small backpack, wearing a blue dress with a cardigan that looked new. "Mrs. Wilson helped me pick it," she explained, noticing his glance. "She's the head nurse. She said I should dress nice." "It's very nice," James said awkwardly, ushering her inside. "Are you hungry? I thought we could do the first thing on your list. Breakfast." Lily nodded, eyes widening as she took in the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. "Your house is in the sky." James had arranged for his personal chef to prepare breakfast. Perhaps overkill, but he wanted to impress her. They sat at his rarely used dining table, while the chef served Belgian waffles with fresh strawberries. "Is this what you eat every day?" Lily asked, carefully cutting her waffle into precise squares. "Actually, I usually just grab coffee on the way to the office," James admitted. Lily considered this. "That's not very healthy. Growing bodies need protein and complex carbohydrates for optimal brain function." She sounded like she was quoting a medical textbook. James couldn't help but smile. "Are all 8-year-olds as smart as you?" "No," she answered matter-of-factly. "I tested at college level in mathematics and logical reasoning. The hospital psychologist says I'm exceptionally gifted." She paused. "But I'm not very good at sports." "Me neither," James confessed. "I was always the last kid picked for teams." "Really?" Lily looked genuinely surprised. "But you're so successful." James shrugged. "Being good at sports and being successful aren't the same thing." "My social studies teacher says sports build character," Lily persisted. "Maybe. But so does figuring out who you really are and what you're good at." James found himself wanting to reassure her. "Your ability with computers, that's special, Lily. Really special." She ducked her head, but he caught her pleased smile. For the first time, James felt a flicker of genuine connection with this strange, brilliant child. After breakfast, they moved to the second item on her list, the park. James couldn't remember the last time he'd been to a park. His security team wasn't pleased about the public exposure, but he overruled them. At Lincoln Park, Lily approached the playground cautiously. "I don't usually get to do this much," she explained. "Exercise restrictions." What are you allowed to do?" James asked, suddenly concerned about her health. "Walking is okay. Swinging is okay if I don't go too high." She looked longingly at the children running and climbing. No running. James felt an unexpected surge of protectiveness. "Want to try the swings?" And on the swing set, gently pushing her, James found himself relaxing. Lily's face was transformed by simple joy, her serious demeanor giving way to childish delight. "My dad used to take me to a park like this," she said as she swung. "Before he and Mom died, he called me his little system debugger and said I'd help people someday." "He was right," James said quietly. "You already have." As the morning continued, James was surprised to find himself enjoying her company. Lily's observations were insightful, her questions thoughtful. She didn't demand constant entertainment like he imagined most children would. Instead, she seemed content simply to be with him. For item 3, teach me something new, James brought her to his home office and showed her a project he'd been working on. An advanced transaction verification system. "This is cutting edge," he explained, showing her the flowcharts. "No one outside the company has seen this." Lily studied the screen intently. "It's beautiful," she said finally. "The architecture is so elegant." James blinked, startled by her assessment. It was exactly how he felt about the design, though he'd never expressed it that way. "That's exactly right. It is beautiful." She looked up at him. "Is this what you love most? Creating systems?" The question caught him off guard. When was the last time anyone had asked him about what he loved? "I guess it is," he admitted, "building something from nothing, solving problems." Lily nodded seriously. "Me too." By mid-afternoon, James was astonished to realize he was genuinely enjoying himself. They had moved on to item 4 on Lily's list, watching a movie with popcorn, and were settled in his rarely used home theater room. "What kind of movies do you like?" he asked, navigating through streaming options. Lily considered the question seriously. "I like documentaries about space and animated movies with robots." James scrolled until he found a well-reviewed animated film about a robot searching for its creator. As the movie played, he found himself watching Lily more than the screen. Her complete absorption in the story, the way she unconsciously leaned forward during tense moments, her small hand occasionally dipping into the popcorn bowl they shared. It struck him that this was the first time he'd watched a movie with someone else in this room. Rebecca had never seen the penthouse. He'd purchased it after her death, part of his attempt to erase memories of their shared apartment. "The robot reminds me of you," Lily said suddenly, eyes still on the screen. "Me? How so?" "He's really smart but alone, and he's looking for connection but doesn't know how to ask for it properly." James felt a strange constriction in his chest. How did this child see through him so easily? "That's quite an observation," he managed. Lily shrugged. "I watch people a lot at the hospital. You learn things." After the movie, they ordered pizza. Lily confessed she'd never had it delivered to her home before, only eaten hospital cafeteria pizza, and sat at his kitchen island. "Can I ask you something?" James ventured, curiosity finally overwhelming his caution. "Yesterday you could have asked for money as a reward. Hospital bills paid, whatever you wanted. Why ask for this instead?" Lily chewed thoughtfully before answering. "Money doesn't fix the important things." She looked down at her plate. "I've had 3 foster families. They were nice enough, but they always looked at me like I was already gone, like they were just waiting." "Waiting for what?" James asked, though he feared he knew the answer. "For me to die," she said simply. "Heart surgeries have statistics. Mine aren't very good." James felt as though he'd been punched. The matter-of-fact way she discussed her own mortality was more devastating than tears would have been. "But you're not afraid," he observed, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm a little afraid," she admitted, "but mostly I just wanted one normal day. To know what it would have been like if they hadn't gotten on that plane, if I had a real family." James thought of his own life, success, wealth, achievement, and how empty his penthouse felt each night, how meaningless his accolades seemed in comparison to what this child was asking for. "You know," he said carefully, "when my wife died, I thought the pain would kill me. I couldn't bear to feel it, so I stopped feeling much of anything. Threw myself into work. It seemed safer." Lily's eyes were solemn. "Did it work?" "No," James admitted. "It just made me lonely instead of sad." "Being lonely hurts too," she said with the wisdom of someone who knew firsthand. James nodded. "Yes, it does." As evening approached, Lily began to tire, her energy visibly flagging. James recalled what she'd said about her heart condition and felt a stab of worry. "Should we head back to the hospital?" he asked. Lily shook her head firmly. "Not yet. We still have the last thing." She pointed to her list. "Tuck me in at night." James had prepared his guest room, feeling strangely nervous about whether she would like it. He'd instructed his assistant to purchase children's bedding. The resulting space-themed comforter and glow-in-the-dark star stickers seemed to meet with Lily's approval. "This is the nicest room I've ever slept in," she declared, examining the stars on the ceiling. As she changed into pajamas in the adjoining bathroom, James found himself wondering what normal fathers did at bedtime. Read stories, check for monsters under the bed. Lily emerged in simple blue pajamas, carrying a worn book. "Will you read to me?" she asked. "It's okay if you don't want to." James took the book, a collection of short stories about famous scientists and inventors. I'd be happy to. As he read about Marie Curie's discoveries, Lily's eyelids grew heavy. By the third page, she was fighting to stay awake. Time to sleep, he said gently, closing the book. Thank you for today, she murmured, eyes already closing. It was exactly what I imagined. James hesitated, then carefully tucked the blankets around her small form. Good night, Lily. Good night, Dad, she whispered, the word hanging in the darkness after she drifted to sleep. James stood in the doorway, a strange ache in his chest, watching the rise and fall of her breathing. For the first time in 5 years, he felt something crack in the wall he'd built around his heart. James woke at dawn after a fitful sleep, his mind racing with thoughts of Lily and her impending surgery. He found himself researching congenital heart defects on his tablet, horrified as he read about the complexity of her condition and the risks of the procedure she faced. When Lily emerged from her room, dressed in yesterday's clothes and carefully making her bed, James was struck by the orderliness of a child who'd grown up in institutional settings. "Good morning," he said, attempting cheerfulness. "Sleep well?" She nodded, approaching the breakfast counter where he'd laid out cereal options. "The stars were nice to look at. I counted 97 before I fell asleep." Over breakfast, James found himself reluctant to acknowledge that their time was almost up. Thomas Reed would arrive at noon to take Lily back to the hospital. "What would you like to do with our remaining hours?" he asked. Lily looked down at her cereal, stirring it thoughtfully. "Could we just stay here? I like it here." "Of course." James was surprised by her request. "Any particular reason?" "It feels like a home," she said simply. A real one. The words struck James with unexpected force. His expensive penthouse had never felt like a home to him, merely a place to sleep between workdays. He deliberately kept it impersonal, minimal, like a high-end hotel suite. Yet somehow, this child found comfort in its sterile perfection. They spent the morning in comfortable quiet. Lily showed him some of her designs. Intricate flowcharts of systems far beyond what most adults could conceptualize. James shared stories of his early days coding, how he'd built his first program at 12, how he'd worked through college on scholarship. "Your parents must have been proud," Lily observed. James shook his head. "My father was gone by then. My mother, she didn't really understand what I was doing." He paused. "Your parents understood you, though." Lily nodded. "Dad said I had a special brain. Mom said I had a special heart." Her expression grew sad. "Turns out she was right about my heart, just not in the way she meant." James felt a profound sense of injustice at this brilliant child's circumstances. Before he could respond, his phone rang. Marcus, with news about the company. "The system has been stable for 24 hours, Marcus reported. "Board is ecstatic. Stock is rebounding. James, this girl's solution saved us hundreds of millions." "I know," James said quietly, watching Lily sketch at his dining table. "So what happens now with the kid?" "She goes back to the hospital this afternoon. Surgery next week." There was a pause. "And that's it? You're just going to send her back?" James bristled. "What else am I supposed to do, Marcus? I fulfilled her request one day." Right," Marcus's tone was careful. "It's just, you seem different since yesterday." "I'm fine," James insisted, though the tightness in his chest suggested otherwise. At noon, Thomas Reed arrived, clipboard in hand. Lily quietly packed her few belongings, while James signed the necessary paperwork, terminating his temporary guardianship. "She did well?" Reed asked, eyeing James cautiously. "She was perfect," James answered honestly. "Extraordinary, actually." Reed nodded, unsurprised. "Lily is special. Brilliant mind, enormous heart. Metaphorically speaking, shame about her medical situation." He lowered his voice. "The surgery next week is high risk. Third attempt to repair a complex defect." James felt his mouth go dry. What are her chances? Reed hesitated. Dr. Chen puts it at 60-40. Not terrible, but still concerning. His casual assessment of a child's life chances made James's stomach turn. When Lily emerged with her backpack, her expression was carefully neutral, the face of a child accustomed to transitions and goodbyes. "Thank you for everything, Mr. Parker," she said formally, extending her small hand. James knelt to her level instead, meeting her eyes. "Thank you, Lily, for helping my company and for—" He struggled to articulate what else she had done for him. "Being your daughter for a day?" she suggested softly. "Yes," he managed, his throat tight, "exactly that." She nodded solemnly. "I won't forget." As Reed led her to the elevator, Lily turned back once, raising her hand in a small wave. The doors closed and she was gone. James stood in the sudden silence of his penthouse, which now seemed unbearably empty. He walked to the guest room where Lily had slept, observing the perfectly made bed, the glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling, the single long brown hair on the pillow. His phone buzzed with messages from the office, meetings, decisions, the machinery of Parker Technologies demanding his attention. For the first time in 5 years, he found himself completely uninterested in work. Instead, he picked up his tablet and began researching pediatric cardiac surgeons. If Lily's chances were only 60-40, perhaps he could improve those odds. Parker Technologies had resources, connections. Surely there was something he could do. By evening, James had identified the top 3 pediatric heart specialists in the country. He was on the phone with his assistant, arranging to fly them to Chicago for consultations, when his doorman called up. "Mr. Parker, Dr. Sarah Chen from Children's Memorial is here to see you. Says it's urgent." James felt his heart drop. "Send her up immediately." "Doctor." Chen was a composed woman in her early 40s, still wearing scrubs under her coat. Her expression was grave as she entered his penthouse. "Mr. Parker, I apologize for coming unannounced, but I needed to speak with you directly about Lily Madison." "Has something happened?" James asked, fear constricting his chest. "Her condition has destabilized. We're moving her surgery up to tomorrow morning." Dr. Chen studied him carefully. "She's been asking for you." "I'll come immediately," James said, already reaching for his coat. Dr. Chen's expression softened slightly. "I hoped you'd say that. She's stable for now, but her cardiac readings are concerning. The team is prepping her for tomorrow." During the drive to Children's Memorial, James's mind raced. What had started as a bizarre business encounter had somehow become deeply personal in just 36 hours. This brilliant, vulnerable child had found a crack in his carefully constructed walls. The pediatric cardiac ward was painted in cheerful colors that couldn't mask its essential purpose. Dr. Chen led him to a private room where Lily lay connected to monitors, her small form diminished against white sheets. "Lily," Dr. Chen said gently, "your visitor is here." Lily's eyes fluttered open. When she saw James, her face transformed with a smile that clutched at his heart. "You came," she whispered. "Of course I did." James moved to her bedside, shocked by how fragile she looked. Dr. Chen stepped out, leaving them alone. James carefully sat in the chair beside the bed. "I didn't think I'd see you again," Lily admitted, her voice thin. James swallowed hard. "Lily, why didn't you tell me your surgery was so risky?" She looked away. "Everyone gets weird when they know, treats me differently." Her fingers plucked at the blanket. "I just wanted one normal day." The monitors beeped steadily as James struggled with emotions he'd kept buried since Rebecca's death. Grief, fear, the terrible vulnerability of caring for someone who might be lost. "Are you scared?" he asked quietly. Lily nodded, a single tear sliding down her cheek. "I don't want to die." The raw honesty broke something in James. He reached for her hand, enveloping it in his. "Listen to me, you're not going to die." I'm bringing in additional specialists to consult on your case. You don't have to do that, she protested weakly. Yes, I do. The certainty in his voice surprised even him. Lily, you helped save my company. Let me help you. She studied him with those two perceptive eyes. Is that the only reason? James felt the walls around his heart crumbling. No, he admitted, it's not. Before either could speak again, a nurse entered to check Lily's vitals. James stepped into the hallway, pulling out his phone to coordinate with the specialists he'd contacted earlier. By midnight, he'd arranged for the country's leading pediatric cardiologist to review her case before surgery. When he returned to Lily's room, she was asleep. James sank into the chair beside her bed, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest, listening to the reassuring beep of monitors. Thomas Reed found him there at dawn, still keeping vigil. Mr. Parker, I didn't expect to see you here. James looked up, his decision already made. I want to apply for temporary guardianship of Lily Madison during her recovery. Reed's eyebrows rose. That's unexpected. There are processes, evaluations. I understand. I'll comply with everything required, but I want to start the process now. Reed studied him carefully. This isn't a business acquisition, Mr. Parker. This is a child with serious medical needs. I'm aware, James said firmly. Please, just tell me what I need to do. As Reed reluctantly outlined the process, Dr. Chen appeared with the specialist James had arranged. Mr. Parker, she said, Dr. Winters has reviewed Lily's case. We're ready to discuss the procedure. In the conference room, Dr. Winters explained the specific challenges of Lily's condition and proposed a modification to the surgical approach. Bottom line, James finally said. What are her chances with this approach? Dr. Winters exchanged glances with Dr. Chen. I'd estimate 70% chance of a successful repair. Better than 60-40, Dr. Chen added. Significantly better. James nodded. Do it. Whatever it costs. As they prepared to leave, Dr. Chen touched his arm. Mr. Reed mentioned your interest in guardianship. May I ask why? James looked through the window to Lily's room. Because she deserves someone who sees her as more than a medical statistic. And he hesitated. I need to remember what matters beyond quarterly reports. Dr. Chen smiled faintly. You've known her 2 days. Sometimes 2 days is enough to change your perspective entirely. The surgical waiting room was a purgatory of uncomfortable chairs and stale coffee. James paced restlessly, checking his watch every few minutes. Lily had been in surgery for 4 hours already. Marcus arrived carrying fresh coffee and concern. Any news? James shook his head. Nothing yet. They sat in silence until Marcus spoke again. The board's called an emergency meeting. They want to discuss recent events. Tell them I'm unavailable, James said tersely. They're concerned about your judgment, James. First the security breach, now this, personal involvement with a child. James felt a flare of anger. That child identified a vulnerability that our entire security team missed. I know that, but they're questioning whether you're thinking clearly after. Marcus hesitated. After Rebecca, James finished flatly. Tell them my personal life is none of their business. Marcus sighed. It becomes their business when you're suddenly seeking guardianship of a critically ill child you met 2 days ago. How did they? James began, then realized. Read. The board has concerns about potential liability, distraction from company leadership. Enough, James interrupted. Tell them if they want to discuss my future with the company, they can wait until a little girl isn't fighting for her life. As Marcus left, Dr. Chen appeared, still in surgical scrubs. James stood immediately. She's stable, Dr. Chen said. Dr. Winters' approach worked. The repair looks good. Relief flooded through James. So she's going to be okay. The next 48 hours are critical, but yes, her prognosis is much improved. Dr. Chen studied him. Mr. Parker, about the guardianship application. I'm still pursuing it, he stated firmly. Then you should know something. Lily's medical needs are substantial. Her parents' insurance covered earlier treatments, but since then, she's been on state assistance. Her ongoing care. Money isn't an issue, James interrupted. Dr. Chen nodded. I assumed as much, but her care isn't just financial. It's emotional, physical. It's midnight fevers and medication schedules and dietary restrictions. It's a commitment. James met her gaze steadily. I understand. Do you? She challenged gently. 2 days ago, you didn't know she existed. Before James could respond, alarms sounded from the recovery area. Dr. Chen's face changed instantly. Wait here, she ordered, rushing toward the sound. The next 20 minutes were the longest of James's life. When Dr. Chen finally returned, her expression was grave. There's been a complication. Post-surgical bleeding. Dr. Winters is addressing it now. James felt his world narrowing to a single point of focus. What can I do? Nothing but wait, she said gently, and hope. Hours passed in a blur of anxiety. Corporate concerns faded to insignificance. James realized with startling clarity that nothing mattered except Lily's survival. Finally, Dr. Winters emerged, exhaustion etched on his face. We've controlled the bleeding. She's stable again. The next 12 hours are critical, but I believe the worst is behind us. Thank you, James said, his voice raw. Can I see her? Briefly. She's in recovery. In the ICU, James barely recognized Lily beneath the tubes and bandages. Her skin was nearly translucent, her chest rising and falling with mechanical precision, thanks to the ventilator. You're the strongest person I've ever met, he whispered, gently touching her hand. Keep fighting, Lily. I'm not going anywhere. As dawn broke, James dozed in the chair beside her bed. He woke to a gentle touch on his shoulder, Dr. Chen, with cautious optimism in her eyes. Her numbers are improving. She's fighting. James nodded, not trusting himself to speak. You should get some rest, she suggested. A real bed, food. We'll call immediately if anything changes. James shook his head. I'm staying. Dr. Chen studied him thoughtfully. You know, in 15 years of pediatric cardiology, I've seen all kinds of parents. The ones who run when things get hard, the ones who break under the strain. She paused. I'm beginning to think Lily chose very well. She didn't choose me, James corrected. She chose a fantasy, one day with a pretend father. Maybe, Dr. Chen conceded, or maybe she saw something in you that you've forgotten was there. By the 3rd day after surgery, Lily was breathing on her own, her recovery exceeding expectations. James had barely left the hospital, working remotely from her room, sleeping in the recliner beside her bed. When she finally opened her eyes properly, her first words were, You're still here. I told you I wasn't going anywhere, James replied, moving to her side. A ghost of her smile appeared. I thought you might have important CEO things to do. Nothing more important than this. He carefully took her hand. How do you feel? Like an elephant sat on my chest, she whispered. James laughed softly. Dr. Winters says that's normal. He also says the repair looks excellent. Lily's eyes widened. Dr. Winters, the doctor. Winters from Mayo Clinic? You know him? Everyone with my condition knows Dr. Winters. She looked at James with dawning understanding. You brought him here? For me? Before James could respond, Thomas Reed appeared in the doorway, his expression a mixture of professional concern and genuine relief at seeing Lily awake. Well, look who's back with us, Reed said, approaching the bed. You gave us quite a scare, young lady. Lily managed a weak smile. Sorry. Reed turned to James. Mr. Parker, could I speak with you outside? In the hallway, Reed's manner became more formal. I've begun preliminary paperwork for your temporary guardianship application, but there are concerns. What concerns? James asked sharply. Your work schedule, no experience with children, no support network for a child with medical needs. Plus, there are existing foster families specially trained for children with cardiac conditions. Families who passed on Lily multiple times, James pointed out, because her case was too complex. Reed sighed. Mr. Parker, the system isn't perfect, but it exists to protect children. We can't fast-track you just because you're wealthy and suddenly interested. I understand the process and I respect it. But I want to be clear, I'm committed to this. Even if it means fundamental changes to your life, your work, your priorities. Yes, James said without hesitation. Reed studied him for a long moment. I believe you mean that today. The question is whether you'll mean it a month from now, when the reality sets in. Now, I guess you'll have to let me prove it, James replied evenly. Back in Lily's room, James found her dozing. He settled into his chair, opening his laptop to review company reports. Parker Technologies was stabilizing after the crisis, but his absence was being felt. The board was growing increasingly restless. As he worked, Lily stirred. Are you in trouble? She asked sleepily. James looked up, surprised. Why would you think that? You look worried, and you're working all the time, but still staying here. Her eyes, still tired from medication, were nonetheless observant. Is it because of me? James closed his laptop. Lily, do you remember when you asked me to be your dad for a day? She nodded. What if? He began carefully. What if it was more than a day? What if I applied to be your guardian, during your recovery at least? Lily's eyes widened. You mean stay with you for real? For real, James confirmed, if that's what you want. But why? Her voice was barely audible. You don't have to. I already helped with your system. James moved to sit gently on the edge of her bed. This isn't about the system, Lily. This is about you. And maybe a little bit about me, too. You'd be stuck with a kid with a bad heart, she warned. I'd be privileged to have a daughter with the brightest mind and the bravest heart I've ever known. Lily's eyes filled with tears. But you're James Parker. You run a huge company. You're important. So are you, he said simply. More important than any company. Before she could respond, Dr. Chen entered for evening rounds. Seeing Lily's emotional state, she looked questioningly at James. We're having a big conversation, he explained. Dr. Chen checked Lily's vitals. Your numbers look good. How's the pain? 1 to 10. 4, Lily answered. Better than yesterday. Excellent. Dr. Chen made notes in her chart. You know, Lily, I understand Mr. Parker has been discussing guardianship with Mr. Reed. Lily nodded, glancing uncertainly at James. As your doctor, I need to make sure you understand what that means, and that you have a say in this decision. I understand, Lily said quietly. Dr. Chen smiled. I think you do. You're remarkably perceptive. She sat on the other side of the bed. So, what do you think about it? Lily looked down at her hands, then up at James, then back to Dr. Chen. I'm afraid to believe it could be real, in case it isn't. The honesty of her answer squeezed James's heart. Dr. Chen nodded. That's very understandable. It's a big change to consider. But I do know, Lily said, her voice growing stronger. I want a real home. She looked at James. I want him to be my guardian, not just for pretend. 6 weeks after surgery, Lily was discharged from the hospital. The temporary guardianship had been approved with strict oversight and regular check-ins from social services. James had transformed his guest room into a proper bedroom for her, with bookshelves, a desk with a computer set up, and the space-themed bedding she'd liked. Welcome home, he said, as he wheeled her into the penthouse. Temporary home, at least, until you're fully recovered. Lily stared in wonder at the room. You did all this for me. Of course. James helped her settle onto the bed, arranging pillows to support her still-healing chest. Dr. Chen said you need to rest, but you can start some light activities tomorrow. Lily's face lit up. Can I use the computer? James laughed. Yes, but only for an hour at a time, doctor's orders. As Lily recovered, James rearranged his life around her needs. He worked from home 3 days a week, scheduled meetings around her medical appointments, and learned to cook simple meals that met her dietary requirements. The guardianship arrangement faced regular reviews, though not without challenges. Home studies, background checks, interviews with social workers who clearly doubted his suitability. Mr. Parker, one particularly stern evaluator, said, "While your financial resources are certainly adequate, I'm concerned about your lack of experience and support network. Raising a child, especially one with Lily's needs, isn't something you can delegate to assistants." "I'm aware of that," James replied. "That's why I've adjusted my work schedule, joined a support group for parents of children with cardiac conditions, and interviewed for a part-time pediatric nurse." The evaluator looked surprised. "That's thorough." Meanwhile, the board of Parker Technologies grew increasingly impatient with his remote work and reduced hours. Marcus warned him that several board members were discussing leadership concerns. "They respect what you've built," Marcus explained during a private lunch, "but they're worried you've had some kind of breakdown. First Rebecca's death, now this sudden family situation." "It's not a situation," James said sharply. "It's a child I care about." Marcus sighed. "James, I'm on your side, but you need to give them something, a plan for moving forward. Reassurance that Parker Technologies remains a priority." James was silent for a long moment. "What if it's not my only priority anyway? Then you need to tell them that, directly." The conversation weighed on James as he returned home to find Lily working on a computer project. She'd made remarkable progress in her recovery, her brilliant mind eager for stimulation. "I made something," she announced proudly, turning the screen toward him. "It's a program that reminds me when to take my medications and tracks my vitals from my watch." James examined the application, impressed as always by her abilities. "This is excellent work." "Doctor, Chen says if everything looks good at my checkup tomorrow, I can start school next week. The online program, like we talked about." James nodded, sitting beside her. "Lily, there's something I need to discuss with you." Her face immediately grew serious. "Is it bad news about the guardianship?" "No, nothing like that," he assured her. "It's about my company. The board isn't happy with how much time I'm spending away from work." Lily's shoulders slumped. "Because of me. Because of choices I'm making," James corrected firmly. "Choices I don't regret. But your company is important. It's what you built." "Yes, it is." James took a deep breath. "Which is why I'm considering stepping back from my CEO role." Lily's eyes widened in shock. "What? No, you can't." "I'd remain on the board, focus on innovation, the parts I love most, but someone else would handle the day-to-day operations." "But you'd be giving up control of your company because of me." Lily's voice was distressed. "Not giving up, evolving, and not because of you, because of us." Lily shook her head. "I don't want you to resent me later." "I could never resent you," James said softly. "You might," she insisted. "People change their minds about me. The first foster family did when I got sicker." Before he could respond, his phone rang. Thomas Reed. "Mr. Parker," Reed's voice was strained. "We have a situation. The court has received a petition from someone claiming to be Lily's maternal aunt. She's contesting your guardianship." "What?" James felt the blood drain from his face. "Lily doesn't have an aunt. Her files list no living relatives. Apparently, Patricia Whitman has been living abroad. She's returned to the U.S. and is claiming prior relationship and family priority." "That's impossible," James insisted. "Lily would have mentioned an aunt." Reed's hesitation was palpable. Ms. Whitman has documentation, Mr. Parker. And in the eyes of the court, a blood relative usually takes precedence over an unrelated guardian, regardless of resources. I don't have an aunt, Lily insisted, her small face pale with distress. Mom never mentioned a sister. James sat beside her on the sofa, trying to project a calm he didn't feel. Patricia Whitman claims to be your mother's sister. She has photographs, documentation. Then she's lying, Lily said firmly, or confused, or your mother had reasons not to discuss her, James suggested gently. People sometimes hide difficult family relationships. Lily's expression grew thoughtful. Mom never talked about her family. When I asked, she'd changed the subject. The court had scheduled a hearing for the following week. James's attorneys were investigating Patricia Whitman, but preliminary research confirmed her identity as Jessica Madison's estranged sister. I don't want to live with a stranger, Lily whispered that night as James tucked her in. Even if she is related to me. You won't have to, James promised, though uncertainty gnawed at him. Try to sleep. We'll figure this out. After Lily fell asleep, James paced his living room, strategy forming. If Patricia Whitman was indeed Lily's aunt, he'd need to prove she was unsuitable or understand her true motivation. The next morning, against his attorney's advice, James arranged to meet Patricia Whitman at a neutral location, a restaurant near his office. She was in her early 40s, elegantly dressed, with streaks of grey and dark hair that resembled Lily's. Her eyes, however, were calculating in a way Lily's never were. Mr. Parker, she greeted him with practiced warmth. How kind of you to meet with me. I'll be direct, Ms. Whitman, James said, skipping pleasantries. Why appear now, when Lily has been in the system for over 2 years since her parents' death? Patricia's smile tightened. I was living in Europe. Communication was difficult. I only recently learned of my sister's passing and my niece's situation. And yet you had time to prepare extensive documentation for a custody challenge. I'm efficient, she replied smoothly. A family trait, it seems. I understand my niece is quite exceptional. The way she said it, with pride but no affection, raised James's suspicions. She is exceptional in ways that have nothing to do with her intelligence. Of course, Patricia agreed too quickly. I'm eager to provide her with opportunities her talents deserve, such as the finest schools, specialized programs. With proper guidance, Lily could accomplish extraordinary things. James studied her carefully. You've never met her, never seen her through a surgery or held her hand during a nightmare, yet you're suddenly invested in her future. Patricia's expression hardened slightly. Blood is blood, Mr. Parker, and courts recognize that. I'm her only living relative. Why are you really here, Ms. Whitman? She leaned forward. Perhaps we can reach an arrangement. I understand you're a businessman. Surely we can find a mutually beneficial solution. And there it was. You don't want Lily, James realized. You want something else. Patricia sat back, calculating. My sister made choices I didn't agree with, wasted her potential. Her child represents a second chance. A second chance for what? For the family name to achieve recognition. She lowered her voice. I've researched you, Mr. Parker. Self-made billionaire, technological visionary. You understand ambition. James felt disgust rising. What do you want? A foundation in the Madison family name. Generously endowed, with Lily as the future figurehead and me as the current director. You're using a custody claim to extort money, James stated flatly. Patricia's smile was cold. I'm proposing a solution that benefits everyone. Lily gets stability with you. You keep your project. I receive appropriate compensation for relinquishing my rights. James stood. We have nothing more to discuss. Don't be hasty, Patricia warned. I have resources too, and I'm prepared to make this process difficult for everyone. including Lily. James leaned close. "You should know something about me, Ms. Whitman. I don't respond well to threats, especially when they involve people I care about." As he walked away, James was already formulating a plan. Patricia Whitman had revealed her true motivation. Now he just needed to prove it. With Marcus's help, James had Patricia Whitman thoroughly investigated. They discovered multiple previous attempts to extract money from wealthy individuals through various schemes. None had involved children before, but her pattern of opportunistic behavior was clear. The day before the court hearing, James received a call from Thomas Reed. "You won't believe this," Reed said, excitement in his voice. "Ms. Whitman has withdrawn her petition for custody." "What happened?" James asked, though he had a good idea. "Apparently, she received some concerning information about her past activities being brought to light. Decided to return to Europe immediately." James smiled grimly. The evidence he'd gathered had served its purpose. That evening, as he told Lily the news, her relief was palpable. "So she's really gone? She won't try to take me away?" "She's really gone," James confirmed, "and tomorrow we go back to court to continue our process." Lily launched herself into his arms with a force that startled him. "Thank you for fighting for me," she whispered. James held her close, realizing how close he'd come to losing her. "Always," he promised, "always." 6 months later, James stood in the courthouse hallway, straightening his tie nervously. Beside him, Lily wore a new blue dress, her hair styled with a matching ribbon. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded, her expression serious but eyes bright with anticipation. "Ready?" Inside the courtroom, Thomas Reed greeted them with a rare smile. "All the paperwork is in order. Judge Williams is known for being thorough but fair." The proceedings were formal but surprisingly quick. The judge reviewed their file, asked Lily several questions about her feelings on the adoption, and inquired about James's plans for balancing work and parenting. "Mr. Parker," Judge Williams said finally, "the court recognizes the extraordinary circumstances that brought you and Lily together. While your situation is unconventional, the evidence of your commitment is substantial." She smiled. "It is the court's pleasure to approve this adoption." With the bang of her gavel, James Parker officially became Lily Madison Parker's father. Outside the courthouse, Marcus waited with a small celebration. Balloons, flowers, and Lily's favorite chocolate cake from the bakery near their home. "Congratulations, you two," he said warmly. "Official at last." As they celebrated, James reflected on the changes of the past 6 months. He had indeed stepped down as CEO, taking the role of Chief Innovation Officer instead. The board had been resistant but ultimately supportive once they saw his plan for remaining involved while developing new leadership. Parker Technologies continued to thrive, and James found his new role allowed him to focus on what he loved most, creating new technologies while giving him the flexibility Lily needed. Lily had blossomed. Her health improved steadily, her most recent checkup showing the heart repair holding strong. She attended a hybrid school program that combined online learning with in-person classes 3 days a week, allowing for her medical appointments and recovery needs. Most surprisingly, James had discovered that parenting came with a steep learning curve. There had been sleepless nights with medication concerns, frustrating meetings with insurance companies, and the constant background anxiety about her health. Yet these challenges had given his life meaning beyond anything he'd known before. "Dad," Lily said, interrupting his thoughts, "can we show Marcus what we're working on?" James grinned. "Absolutely." Back at their new home, a spacious townhouse with a small garden closer to Lily's school and the hospital than the penthouse had been, they led Marcus to what had once been the formal dining room, now converted into a shared workspace. "This is our lab," Lily announced proudly. The room contained two workstations, one adult-sized, one child-sized, facing each other across a central table covered in electronics. Whiteboards lined the walls, filled with diagrams and notes in two distinct handwritings. "We're developing adaptive technology for kids in hospitals," Lily explained, "based on what I wished I'd had." Marcus examined their early prototypes with genuine interest. "This has potential. Parker Technologies could develop this further." "We're in early discussions," James confirmed, though Lily insists any profits go to Children's Memorial. "It's only fair," she said firmly. "They took care of me when no one else could." Later that evening, after Marcus had gone and Lily was getting ready for bed, a process that now involved James listening to her explain her latest ideas until she grew sleepy, he sat in the quiet living room, marveling at how completely his life had changed. His phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Chen. "Saw the adoption made official today. Congratulations to you both. You were exactly what each other needed." James smiled, knowing she was right. A girl with a brilliant mind and a damaged heart had shown a man with a damaged heart how to be brilliant again. The solution to his $500 million problem had turned out to be worth infinitely more. In Lily's room, glow-in-the-dark stars still adorned the ceiling, a reminder of that first night she'd spent as his daughter for a day. Now, those stars would watch over her for thousands of nights to come. James Parker had built a tech empire from nothing, but his greatest creation was this, a family forged not from obligation or blood, but from recognition of what truly mattered. A little girl had come to help fix a system vulnerability and had instead repaired something far more important, the human heart at the center of the machine. "Dad?" Lily called sleepily from her room. "Can we work on the hospital project tomorrow?" "Absolutely," he answered, rising immediately. Some problems, James had learned, weren't meant to be solved alone, and some solutions changed everything.